So I want to just do a little bit of a recap, remind us of our theme that I introduced last night. We are focusing on the evocative image of the cherubim, the Hebrew for cherubs, right? Cherubim. Really, cherubs is the English for cherubim. Two figures, which we imagine had wings like angels and human faces, which were shaped out of a single piece of gold on the cover of the ark in the Holy of Holies, first in the tabernacle and then in the temple. And I introduced last night a brief text from the Talmud that is so rich in meaning. There are two verses in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, that describe the positioning of the cherub, and they conflict, right? In Exodus, it says they faced each other. And there's a verse in 2 Chronicles that says they faced toward the house, away from each other. And so the Talmud, of course, needs to resolve the difficulty. How can that be? And they ask, which is it? And the answer is both. And how is that possible? What they imagine is that these figures carved out of a single piece of gold actually turned. The text says, right, how were they standing? One says towards the faces, the other says toward the house, and the Talmud says this is not a problem. This way, toward each other, when the people were doing the will of God. And that way, away from each other, when the people were not doing the will of God. So last night I gave you my read on this, right? I see these two figures as mirrors for us, reflecting the people Israel back to themselves then and now. And the text really is about what does it look like when human beings are, quote, doing God's will, or in non-theological terms, what behavior supports life, is conducive to human thriving and flourishing, blessing, peace, goodness, all the things we want. And the answer is, it looks like this. We're facing each other. We're facing each other. And not facing each other, when we're turning away from each other or we're turning against each other, is by definition not doing God's will. It is the behavior that will drive God's presence, quote, meaning good and blessing from our communities, leading to human suffering, violence, and evil, and a kind of death spiral. That's what the text teaches, right? Last night, I went through some of the reasons that this text has been sort of ringing in my ears all year, and why I chose it as our focus on these High Holy Days. It's basically a commentary on our times. I assume I don't have to elaborate again this morning. So this morning, what I want to do is introduce us to another very brief text in the Talmud, also about the cherubim, but from a very different context. It's from a section about the destruction of the temple. And there's one line there attributed to a sage named Rosh Lakish, and he says that when the other nations, right, Israel's enemies, entered the sanctuary, they saw these two figures, the cherubim, embracing each other. So there's a medieval commentator, a 14th century commentator known as the Ritba, and he looks at this text and he says, what are you talking about? How could that be? We just learned that when Israel is not obeying God's will, they're not facing each other. They're only facing each other when Israel is obeying God's will. The time the temple was destroyed, Israel was definitely not obeying God's will. That's why our enemies entered the, right? How could this be? He gives an answer I'm not wild about, so I'm not going to spend time on it. But much later, there's a Hasidic commentator in the 19th century by the name of the Pri Tzaddik. And he takes up the Ritba's problem, and he gives a different answer. And listen to what he says. He says, in the lead up to the destruction of the temple, obviously the people were not behaving well. Israel didn't really believe that the temple would ever be destroyed. But when they saw the other nations actually enter the sanctuary, immediately their hearts were aroused in tshuva, in repentance, in return. And this tshuva immediately was accounted as doing God's will. And so the cherubim turned and they hugged each other. Right? He goes on to say, to connect that moment with the tradition, the rabbinic tradition, that the soul of the Messiah was born on Tisha B'Av, the day the temple was destroyed. And he said it was that moment when they saw and they realized and they did tshuva, that tshuva created the soul of Messiah, the possibility of redemption. That's what he said. So I love this text. I love this read. It is really chilling. And it is also very hopeful. And I think it's speaking directly to us. There are lots of things in life where we actually don't take seriously the possible consequences of our actions. We don't believe it could ever happen until it does. We don't believe our diet and exercise will ever actually affect our health until one day we get a scary number on a blood test or our back goes out and we realize, oh, they were serious about that, right? Even more so with things with long-term consequences, right? We don't really believe that human beings could infect the climate until it starts to happen. And then we realize, oh wait, this is for real. And I want to say that we are more likely to take seriously the consequences of our actions in the practical realm of cause and effect, right? We do take that seriously. We're more likely to take seriously the impact of our diet, more likely, for example, to believe that it could be problematic if we don't pay our bills, right? That we are more likely to take seriously than to believe that there are actually consequences in the spiritual, moral realm. Now, that's partly because life tells us that, right, good people flourish, good people suffer, and people doing a lot of bad things flourish. And so we don't really believe that it works that way. It's not, and reward and punishment is not our theology. But I'm not talking about punishment. What I mean is that wrongdoing affects us. It affects our world, even if we're not caught and we get away with it, right? Even if people doing harm seem to flourish. And so, I don't think we really credit what is at stake right now in our turning towards or against each other. I don't think we really believe how much can be lost. And it's not only the most egregious examples, hate and violence, though, my God, the stakes are high, right? And it's not only the practical cost. I'm talking about the fundamental sort of screwed upness at the core of our culture, a turning away from each other by behaving or believing that we can just pursue our own self-interest, ignoring the impact on other people, that we can act by ourselves and for ourselves, and it'll all just be fine. And it's true on every level, the personal and the political. There is so much suffering in this world because we act alone, and then we feel alone. For such a wealthy society, in many ways, the best times in human history are now. And we're so unhappy. There's so much mental illness. There's so much struggle. What's going on? So in that context, Tshuva, the work of these High Holy Days this year, is really about the realization that we need each other and that we are existentially interdependent. In the text, what opens the path to salvation, what creates the possibility of redemption, is the turning toward each other. The cherubim mirroring the people's embrace of each other. Us too. Not because God will intervene and save us, right? It's the turning, or that God will smite us if we don't. It's the turning itself toward or away from each other that creates the world we want to live in or destroys everything we hold dear. Now, we've just prayed for America and for Israel. And both countries, certainly their governments and lots of the populace in both places, are behaving as though this truth isn't true, as though it's possible to thrive alone, or worse, at the expense of other people, and that somehow it'll just all work out, and it'll be okay, we'll be okay. Now, I'm not talking about necessary self-defense when there's a specific threat in delimited circumstances. I'm talking about an ethos, a long-term strategy that A, we're in it just for ourselves, and B, if it comes at the expense of some other group, that's their problem, not ours, right? And then, of course, we justify it by telling ourselves that that other group has been the problem all along, and so they really deserve it. And we lose the sense of interconnectedness. And it's happening in both directions, right? We're dismissing each other as mattering to our own well-being. I don't care about those people. I don't care about those people. If we turn against them, we get rid of them, we'll all be fine. It won't be fine, right? We kick them out. What happens after? That's their problem. No, it's our problem. We can't behave as though there will be no cost to us. A, Judaism sees this as fundamentally immoral, right? In a very specific context, the Talmud says, what makes you think your blood is redder than theirs? You can't save your own life at the expense of other people's, right? Not if they're not actually threatening you immediately. And more importantly, Judaism understands it as fantasy. That's what this image of the cherubim turning toward or away is teaching. If we are turning away from or against each other, we will drive out goodness and blessing and everything that supports human thriving for everyone. From a spiritual perspective, it would sort of be like my stomach deciding that it can prosper by killing off my kidneys. Right? It's not going to happen. So I want to take this moment to address the elephant in the room directly, right? My rabbinic colleagues have been agonizing over what they're going to say on the High Holy Days about Israel and Gaza. Right? It's been People are agonizing about it. I want to tell you up front that I am not planning on these days to do a quote sermon on Israel and Gaza and the West Bank. I'm not ducking it. I just think that a frontal lecture from me is not a good way for us to talk about it. I don't think anybody's mind is going to be changed. And I don't think that that's really actually what we need now. Some of the teaching that I'm going to offer on these days, I hope, will help you think about it. But I'm not going to address it directly, in part because I really want to practice what I'm preaching here. What we need is to find a way to turn toward each other and talk about it. Honestly, across difference. I'm in the process of working with a couple of members of our synagogue to come up with a context after the holidays in which we can do that. Hopefully, we're working on a process that will enable us to hear each other and turn toward each other where no one feels silenced. So stay tuned for that, right? Now, in saying that, I'm not suggesting total relativism, right? That whatever anybody thinks is fine. I don't believe that. As I said last night, there are bad ideas, right? But we need to talk. For now, I'm going to just say this, and that is, were the temple still standing? I think it seems pretty clear that the cherubim would not be facing each other, because we are turning away from and against one another as Jews, and of course, toward the Palestinian people. And we need to take seriously what we have to lose in this, what the stakes are, specifically Davka as a spiritual problem. Not only a practical problem, although it is a practical problem, right? The harm our enemies could cause us, the global PR problem, anti-Semitism. We take that very seriously, and well, we should. And also, they didn't really believe the temple could be destroyed. We need to treat our own moral, spiritual integrity, our own behavior, as having real stakes and consequences too. It's a both and thing. Now, the hopeful part of the text that I'm bringing just now is, of course, the power of tshuva, of turning toward each other, facing each other, obviously within the Jewish community and outward toward all peoples, recognizing the interdependence of all human beings. Israel, America, humanity as a whole. When they saw that other nations had actually entered the sanctuary, when they realized they were at an inflection point, that the path they were on was leading to destruction of everything they held dear, their hearts were immediately aroused in tshuva, and immediately the cherubim embraced. So yes, we make a mistake in not believing what we could lose, but we also make a mistake in not believing in the possibility of turning its redemptive power toward each other, one by one, face to face. As I said last night, that the central question on the High Holy Days, this tshuva, it means to turn. And the fundamental question in every moment of our lives, but certainly today, is what direction am I facing? Where am I heading? toward and away from what and whom? And most important, what do I need to turn to right now? And I am sure of very few things in life, but I feel sure of this. In this moment, turning toward each other and toward our own humanity, because the two are interdependent, is the only path forward. And the stakes are very high.